Welcome to the Red Chair. Today we have a very special guest, very good friend for a long time, Paddy Cosgrave, founder of the Web Summit, the largest tech conference in the world. Welcome, Paddy, again to Indico.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I've seen this. I saw your first episode with Tim Ferriss. I was
That's right.
really amazed. So it's gone downhill from there.
But now we're going to bring it up again with you.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's so good that you're here, and not like people don't know who you are, but nevertheless, tell us your story. Who's Paddy Cosgrave?
Yeah, I'm the CEO of Web Summit. I grew up in Ireland on a farm about 50 kilometers outside of the capital city. In university, I did a mix of kind of economics, maths, political science. I was always interested in software, but I couldn't really build anything particularly good. But nevertheless, in college, was always trying to build little apps. They weren't called apps at the time. Little websites to do things. Most of it went absolutely.
When was this, more or less?
2004, 2005, 2006, 20 years ago, and slowly a whole series of different events led to the kind of first Web Summit, which was in October 2009.
Why did you come up with this idea? Did you come up with this idea, and how did it come? How did it happen?
I had a previous software startup with a friend of mine called Oisin Hanrahan, who's gone on to great success and build some successful companies. He's just started yet another one. And we started something that really didn't have a particularly big future, and two of the initial investors essentially bought the company for effectively nothing. And I had organised effectively a customer event in October 2009 in Ireland, and I turned it into a tech conference, and that became the very first event. It was just my laptop, my bedroom, asking people, as opposed to just getting drunk in Dublin, would they be up for talking to some of the community. That became the very first one, and about a month later I did another little meetup. February I did another Web Summit and a prototype of founders. So I brought about 15 tech company founders from around Europe into Dublin. We went on a pub crawl, went for dinner, did some round tables, and that became the genesis of what Web Summit is now today. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think the first Web Summit I went was, I wouldn't say 10 years ago, but kind of like maybe 8 or 9, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you know, famously, I met your mother before I met you. She was the lady right back of my, the line, and she was very proud of what you had achieved, and you have achieved so much in the meanwhile. How was, you now looking back, the tech ecosystem grew brutally over the last decade and a half, but certainly the last decade, and you are right at the forefront. How was it to create such a big organization with such a large global footprint in terms of events?
Initially I thought we could create, there weren't really many tech events in Ireland, so I thought we could create a good one in Ireland. But it wasn't until 2012 that the first attendees from the UK started to kind of show up. And at the time there were big behemoths in Europe, some great events, some big events. Le Web was maybe one of the biggest at the time. I remember when we were like 150 people, Slush was 10,000 people. There was an event called Next Web, DLD, which is one of my favorite events.
Still great.
So there were events all over Europe, and I didn't really think we could compete because of geography with events in Paris or Berlin or Munich. But nevertheless, we just kind of stuck at it, and word began to spread that it was a good event, and it got bigger and bigger. Then we got too big for Dublin, had to find another city, chose Lisbon. Seemed to be a controversial decision at the time amongst tech journalists and on Twitter. Lisbon to everybody was a place for a stag party, go surfing, somewhere you went on holiday. It was absolutely not a kind of tech place in Europe.
I was there when you were sort of complaining on stage in Dublin. Like, oh my God, it's his own country. But why did you choose Lisbon? There must be technical reasons, but
at the time Amsterdam, made an offer that on paper made so much more sense than Portugal, and I don't know. My gut as maybe an entrepreneur, I just thought You know what? I think Portugal is going to be something substantial. That there is, there's already something in the air. The ingredients are right. This is like Berlin in the sun. Yeah. This is like the West Coast of the United States. It's just people are too stuck in a mindset that these other cities are the important cities and countries. And I thought that Portugal was certainly more than a holiday destination. There were already, great VCs. There were some great entrepreneurs beginning to emerge. So we went here, got a lot of grief. And then I think over time we proved everyone wrong. And, I think Lisbon was already happening. And Web Summit added a little bit more kind of rocket fuel to the crazy transformation of Portugal and Lisbon in the eyes of the world, into sort of the place too many people probably want to relocate to and work from.
No, you were a big part of that. And how was it you're a great communicator, of course. That's a big part of your personality and your success is the way that you communicate on stage and get people looking into the future. But you also have to be a manager, right? A CEO, right? Sure. It's a big organization. How big is the Web Summit right now, and how did you build this team?
Yeah. It's complicated to say how big the team is, because it's like let's say a film production company. The core production company is very small, but when it goes to produce a movie that it might do over 6 weeks or 6 months, the team scales up massively.
Of course.
So during Web Summit itself in Lisbon, we hired nearly 5,000 people. Some of those people just for the week, some for 2, 3, sometimes for 3 months. The core team full-time year-round is over 300 people, of which just over 100 are based in Portugal. So it's this medium-sized kind of company at this stage, and it's not easy building an organization. You make all the mistakes in the world, and you're doing everything for the first time, and it's trial by, not error, but trial by fire. You're just going to get burnt, and you're going to do things that you utterly regret, and people will give you mixed advice. There's always people willing to offer advice, I think, and sometimes you need to seek out the people who aren't offering advice, because oftentimes the people who are offering advice, they're just doing it for
their own reasons.
And sometimes it can be good advice, but oftentimes it's the slightly quieter behind the scenes people who don't offer advice, who aren't on social media, or have a very subdued presence, who probably when you ask them and pursue them will offer some of the most perceptive advice. At least that's been my experience. And now the team is my exec team. The 9 people that I work with on a day-to-day basis have been in the company for an average of nearly 8 years. The 80 managers across the team have been there an average of about 5 years, and that's sort of the bedrock of the company. And yeah, it's going well at the moment.
Interesting, very good.
Yeah.
And you've seen now a good few generations of entrepreneurs. The first entrepreneurs you saw when you started Web Summit, and some of the most successful, are they different from the entrepreneurs you see now? Because of the market change, because of the generation?
Yeah, I maybe there are some differences. That I thought a lot of the entrepreneurs 10 years ago, they were more technical founders, a little bit less savvy from a communication point of view.
For sure.
So I think there's been a big explosion in how to essentially how to pull the wool over VCs.
Exactly.
So 10 years ago, entrepreneurs just knew how to articulate what it was that they were building, badly, but nevertheless maybe tell you what they were building and explain some examples of different customers and what problem they were solving for those customers. I think these days, entrepreneurs can learn how to create a narrative that messes with the radar of VCs. And I think that must make life as a VC incredibly difficult, because
it's fun.
Every question you could possibly ask, they have looked at potential kind of ways of handling them online.
And now they even have ChatGPT, right?
Yeah. So I just I think it's it's kind of different. I sort of think I'm just so bullish on China, and I look at so much entrepreneurship in the West, and it's all just vaporware. It's all just wrong. It's all waste. So much of it is wasteful.
But don't you think that a lot of the Chinese entrepreneurial system is also a lot of vaporware, right? There was also a lot of money squandered.
Yeah, some of it, but like
billions of ways.
Sure, but if you look at, say, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is a super aggressive anti-China, pro-West, kind of like hyper-militarist, imperialist think tank, all the big dark words, it concluded recently, about 6 months ago, they looked at 44 key high technology sectors in the West, and they concluded that China was now had surpassed the West in all but I think 6 fields or 5, and of those, China was going to surpass the West almost, in the coming years. And then you look at the volume of R&D. You look at 5G. Huawei was investing more in 5G than every single one of their competitors in the West combined. So of course they were going to win. Yes. in the long term. You look at high quality citations across all of these important fields. Increases in those citations in the West has been sort of anemic. And then you look at China, and it's just it's hockey stick growth. So that's real hardcore R&D, and the benefits of that, I think, are accumulating over time, and that leaves the West in a sort of a very complicated position. Obviously, my views are maybe ideologically opposed to a lot of the views with regard to how capitalism functions. I have my own set of views. They're not really in vogue. I'm an old school capitalist that believes the idea of the free market is just a total nonsense, and you need heavy state intervention because the private sector never innovated. It's a total myth to think that entrepreneurs are responsible for innovation. And VCs, they're absolutely not. These are experts in commercialization, but the innovation actually happens as a consequence, almost always, not always, but maybe 99% of the time, as a consequence of state investment through various
universities and
even sometimes R&D labs internal.
It's where it starts.
Internal to large companies.
Where it starts. Yeah. But you need the whole supply chain, of course.
Now, commercialization is not what the state does.
Right.
That's what VCs and kind of entrepreneurs do. But I think there's been a lot of damage through eloquent narrative coming out of Silicon Valley that the innovators are the entrepreneurs and are the venture capitalists. They're the commercializers. The innovators, I think, sit over there, and it's a complementary relationship.
Is it not a problem? I mean, I understand your issue about China and so on, but is it not a problem that sometimes these entrepreneurs have become, in your words, just commercializers, people that tell a narrative, and maybe the narratives have been overblown a little bit too much. I'm not even going to say that they're, that's why, the bubble bursted, because there's other macro factors, of course. To my question before, did the entrepreneurs change in a sense that they started becoming less adherent to reality and more focused on valuation and narratives and not so much on actually product?
I agree with that. And, the interplay between vast amounts of money and
it's a toxic combination.
It's you add the two of those together, and it's highly combustible. Personally, when I'm dealing with the role of Web Summit is not to platform the
commercializers.
The kind of the CEOs of today, the big names of today. It's always about trying to find the ones you may not know about. And then we also, it's a long story, we also like to platform it's like a music festival. You go to the music festival and there's lots of different tents, and some of the artists are actually kind of on the way back maybe. They were big a number of years ago, and it's good, it's just interesting. People are just kind of curious, like, I wonder what's happening to this company. Because not every company that goes down hits the bottom.
No.
There's lots of cases that those companies eventually come back out, and I think
they just stabilize and become stable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just intriguing sometimes. So there's we're big fans of sort of, not, I wouldn't say it's like second chances. It's sort of like, the halo is darkening, looks like everything is fading. They've done some layoffs, but let's have them. Let's hear what's happening in that sector that everybody's now not interested in. Because in the end, maybe something interesting will emerge.
The hype cycles, right? I mean, there's some hype cycles that you sort of
yeah,
try to sort of
so
counter.
we cancelled CryptoConf at Web Summit in 2019, I think, because I felt that it was just getting too out of control. But then we reintroduced it,
and that was a good time.
I'll be the first to no, we reintroduced it in 2021 because I felt that there was I'll just be totally honest, there was just so much money available from these crazy people who wanted to have stands at Web Summit, and I'm like, cool, if you want to play $250,000 for a stand, I mean, I think what you're doing is like
interesting,
total smoke and mirrors. But go for it.
That's a good example, and AI is another good example, right? There was a hype, then AI was useless, and now AI is great again, and it's going to save the world or destroy it. And crypto is kind of the same, right? There are several cycles. We remember the ICOs where people would tell us, VCs are dead, the ICOs are going to change the whole thing. And then ICOs were a total scam, mostly, right? And there's these cycles. Do you try to combat that? Obviously, you have to sell stands.
No, we absolutely do. We have a system internally, but it's very hard. And that's the same for VCs as well. I mean, some of the most successful, over multiple decades, funds in the history of the world have got completely duped over the last number of years. They've all the resources, all the brains, and even they get fooled sometimes. And so, we're not as sophisticated as some of these operators, and that's going to happen to us. And oftentimes as well, one of the challenges for us is, we get a lot of pressure from, I'll just say, VCs who've made these bets, and they really want to
push.
They want to push like crazy.
Their CEOs, right?
Yeah. And they want, maybe it's because they're like, oh my God, Tiger or SoftBank will buy all the secondaries, and I need to get out.
But get them on stage. Push them.
So there are all these kind of really interesting dynamics that we have to, figure out, and there's so much more behind. When people look at Web Summit, they're like, well, there can't be that many people. They ask me, what do you do for the rest of the year? And I'm like, there are literally over 300 people full-time year-round making this happen, plus thousands of other specialized contractors that we hire. It's way bigger than people might think, and it's quite complicated as well. Oftentimes there are clashes between nations as well. We've had a lot of pressure and pushback from major Western powers about the participation of companies from elsewhere in the world. I don't need to go into it. So it's quite interesting. And even between European nations, aggrieved to bring big trade delegations, ministers, and there's a lot of protocol, and oftentimes there are, I think maybe not broadly understood tensions between even European countries in critical sectors, because they compete against each other. That's not a bad thing, but sometimes that competition spills over into the political sphere.
And I suppose governments also want to take advantage of the stage, literally, right? So it's part of the game.
So we're we create a little bit of presence for Portugal, for Portuguese politicians, but then quite limited participation outside of historically Margaret Vestager, because I think it's just quite interesting oftentimes what she's saying. I don't have to agree with it or disagree with it. That's not my role. But she's saying something that's relevant, and I think therefore it's quite interesting to let her articulate her position.
You've expanded well beyond Ireland and Portugal, and you're now also in Brazil, by the way. How did that go?
Brazil was kind of crazy. We reached an agreement with the Brazilian government and with the city of Rio that we do a regional event there, and the target, it wasn't rigid, was that we would try and do a 5,000 person event in the first year.
5,000.
And then it ended up being over 20,000, and that is strange because you have to think of the broader macroeconomic environment at the moment. Mass tech layoffs, valuations in private tech world going to the floor, all sorts of issues. But it would seem to me that certainly in South America, Latin America, it's kind of irrelevant to them. I mean, Silicon Valley, that's a term, only showed up recently anyway. Yes. So the roots
there were valuations also lowered in Brazil. Have portfolio there and so on, but still, it's obviously it's still a market that is going up, right?
I think so. Yeah,
partially valuations in Europe also didn't go as down as Silicon Valley because they had never gone as up, right? So it's
so it was definitely it took us by massive surprise. But then I think people just underestimate the sheer scale of Brazil alone.
Absolutely.
It's just so big.
It's gigantic.
You know, the Rio metropolitan area is bigger than all of Portugal. You know, it's and that's not even the biggest city, so it's sort of ridiculous.
It is incredible. Yeah. It is incredible. And so how?
And now we've more Brazilians coming to Web Summit than ever before in Lisbon, because our view is almost like, it's not a perfect example, but the World Economic Forum does these regional events throughout the year, and I think Web Summit has massive brand identity in Europe, and I think growth in the longer term, and this is true just of the global economy in general, is going to come from outside of Europe, most certainly. Like, we're looking at a relatively flat decade. I think everybody agrees on that. And so from our point of view, you know, Brazil, India, the Middle East, Africa, these are all kind of growth markets, and we should increase participation of people from these parts of the world. And I think that's broadly of interest to most European companies, because most European companies are trying to build globally successful businesses, and it's interesting to meet people from these key people from these other markets.
For sure. We have witnessed during the the pandemic to the rise of hybrid and remote work, remote conferences, remote everything.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? After a few years, thank God we have the Web Summit back.
A few observations. So first, COVID nearly killed Web Summit. It almost bankrupted the company. Then last year we had our, it's a matter of the public record, we had our largest revenue year ever. So we went into COVID, nearly killed us, and then came out just at a pace that was pretty unprecedented. We built software for virtual conferences. We then started licensing that to the United Nations, to CES. So CES ran on our platform in 2022, maybe January 2022. And then we killed it because we thought that virtual conferences was a great COVID market fit, but actually had no future. And I say that because, and this is another observation, we signed a seed round check for Hopin that became the fastest, growing by valuation at least, startup in European software history. And I pushed very hard to cash out at the peak, managed to persuade the people I was involved with that they should sell 50%.
Oh, and you did?
But then they sued me for forcing them to do that, and that as a consequence there would be significant unrealized gains. And I had tried to do for 100%, but we returned half the fund on an investment we'd made 12 months previous. And now Hopin was at basically an 8 billion valuation. We had done a more than 100x return inside 12 months. And Hopin was sold a few weeks ago for 15 million, which was the amount that was returned by selling half of our stake, having put 150,000 in or something like that. So you get lucky. But the amazing thing with Hopin was that we internally, because we looked at the software, were adamant anyway that it was total junk. I just think they had a very compelling proposition.
For sure.
There was a COVID market fit, and it sort of it took off, but I don't see a future at all for virtual conferences.
I mean, of course, there's a use case for training and sessions.
But no bigger than it was before, which wasn't a huge market.
Yeah. And what do you think about remote working? You think it's going to stay, or you think people eventually...
Yeah, that's really big. Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. I mean, we had remote teams, remote managers before the pandemic, and they work great. I think it's so specific to a company, to a sector, to particular teams, managers. I'm not a big believer in one size fits all, so we leave a lot of the decision making in terms of the amount of time people might spend in an office or not to individual managers.
Of course.
And they dictate the sort of cadence. You can be entirely remote if you want. There's no requirement, but I don't know long term. I've no answer to that.
Difficult when you have inexperienced teams and they need to build and be together.
I mean, I on a human level, I feel so sorry for 22, 23, 24-year-olds leaving university.
Yes.
They're leaving their social network, and they're, I think, almost entirely reliant on building their human network by being able to interact with people in an office environment.
Yes, if they don't have that, honestly.
And now they're on a laptop in a small apartment in some city, and it's just grim.
Some of them are here and
enjoying life.
They're surfing in Caparica or in Ericeira, but nevertheless, I think that's an issue. And what about the 4-day work week? Do you have a view on that?
I mean, the evidence seems to be quite compelling. I mean, Marx and Keynes were kind of sure at this point. I mean, Marx 150 years ago, Keynes 70 years ago, that we really wouldn't be working at all. We should be down to 1 day a week at this point.
Didn't quite happen.
Yeah. So maybe we're moving towards a more Marxian nirvana, slowly but surely, whilst not admitting it. So I don't know. I mean, the evidence seems good. It's interesting. You know, we've talked about kind of trying it at different stages over probably the last 5 years, and you know, as a company, we've never really been too 9 to 5. It's like we run most teams on, say, OKRs, and if you know, what matters is people just hitting, you know, what they set out to hit. It doesn't matter to me what time of day they work.
For sure.
You know, I think that's the same for most
people. What's your? I mean, you're a bit young for this, but what would you like your legacy to be? If you can comment on that at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, that's different from, you know, from a business point of view. I separate that from my own personal kind of interests. I have an acute personal interest as an Irish citizen and Irish taxpayer. I kind of think of it as in, like, I play a lot of tennis, so if I'm a member of a particular tennis club and I'm paying €500 a year, I want to make sure that €500 is spent.
I've heard of this.
Kind of correctly.
That is this
you know, thing. Yeah. But if I'm actually paying 50,000 a year in taxes, or 100,000, or even more, I'm like, I want my membership fee to be used kind of correctly. Right. So I'm very passionate in Ireland in just in terms of just highlighting maybe misappropriation of taxpayers' money, or just straight out white collar criminality, political corruption, and have helped jail some people for that, and force multiple ministers to resign for just kind of corruption. And you know, that's my interest in my country. And
but it is a global problem, right? I mean, all the other areas of the world.
I'm never going to solve that. Like, you know, Ireland's got 5 million people, so you got to, like, you know, if you have a little hobby on the side, it should be proportionate to the time available and the resources, and just not too much naivety. I think as a human being, that would be a legacy I'd be more proud of, I think, by the time I'm, you know, if I live to 70 or 80. As regards Web Summit, I mean, the ambition has always been to build the best sort of business tech conference in the world, and to do that by building a lot of software, which we continue to do internally. Our engineering team is by far our largest team now, and you know, maybe one day that'll provide some of the infrastructure that other events will run around the world, but we're in no rush to do that. The current business is a great business, and that's I just want Web Summit to be the annual kind of best gathering for the companies that are building the future of the world, not, to be clear, for the companies that dominate the world today, even though we're glad when some of them come and want to be partners and stuff like that.
That's
it's kind of, it's providing a platform to the people you don't know, but hopefully will know 5 years from now. That's kind of, and it's your job as well. Your job is to find the future. Job. It's not really to hang around and hobnob with the status quo of today. It's to find the problematic, restless people who often get mistaken for being very negative, but but that negative energy is directed positively. They see a problem, they're just like, this isn't good enough, but I have a solution. And it's not that they're not some of the best entrepreneurs are kind of angry. They're agitated.
Yes.
That they want things to be better. I think a lot of professional athletes are the same. They're just they're kind of, there is, you know, everyone has a negative energy inside them, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs are able to take that negativity
and express it in a positive way.
In a positive way.
In a solution. Yeah, we've had many professional athletes here at the Red Chair, and there's so many parallels with entrepreneurs.
Oh, I think so.
Paddy, it was great to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Always good to see you, and congratulations on your new offices here. And we'll see you in November at the Web Summit.
I can't wait for it. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode.